Thank you, Mr. Chair. Professor Stedman, I want to ask you some questions about the Prime Minister's so-called ethics screen. This so-called ethics screen encompasses 103 different companies, including Brookfield, companies that engage in everything from energy to ports to transport to infrastructure to fishing, you name it. These companies are involved in all manner of activities that touch upon federal public policy and decisions that the Prime Minister could be involved in making. Are you aware of any ethics screen that has been put in place that is as vast as the one put in place in respect of Mr. Carney, given the vast number of potential conflicts of interest that he is involved in?
The easy answer, no. There's no way I've ever heard of anything quite this broad.
Thank you. This so-called ethics screen is being administered by the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council. Given the large number of companies captured by the screen and the large number of potential conflicts of interest involving Mr. Carney, do you have any concerns about the practicability on a day-to-day basis of these two very busy people properly and effectively screening out conflicts of interest from the Prime Minister?
Yeah, absolutely. And I've been quoted on this several times when the election was happening. I have no idea how they're going to be able to screen for all of these things and continue to do their job at the same time. I wonder if there's some sort of automated process that they have in place. I've said several times it would be nice to know more about how they're going to operationalize this actual screen. I don't think that we have any information about how they are actually managing to do this.
No transparency. And pursuant to the ethics screen, just to be clear, Mr. Carney may still participate in discussions and make decisions affecting these 103 companies on most matters, even where he stands to personally and financially benefit. Isn't that right?
That's correct. It's the disproportionate clause that comes into his screen that I've also commented on as being unique and something that we should learn more about. And I think that came up with your previous witness, too.
And speaking of the disproportionate clause, that is language that is not found in the Conflict of Interest Act, is it?
It is not in the Act, nope.
And it's not defined in the ethics screen, is it?
Not in the screen, no. It's the kind of thing that the trustees are, I suppose, supposed to figure out. It would be nice to know how they've defined it so that we could, as a public that's interested in knowing more, also
really going to be
play along.
It's going to be really left to the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff and the Clerk of the Privy Council to interpret on a case-by-case basis whether there is a disproportionate interest or not. Is that right?
That's my understanding, absolutely, yeah.
And so here we have an ethics screen that is unprecedented in scope, administered by two of the busiest people in government, making decisions as to what the Prime Minister sees and what he doesn't see based upon an ambiguous proportionality standard. In the face of all of that, what assurance do Canadians have that this so-called ethics screen is working?
Trust and faith. I'm not sure you have any sort of documented assurance in any way whatsoever. You just have to hope that we put someone in public office who acts with integrity at this point.
And so, just to pick up on that, you can't point to any tangible proof, documents, disclosure, public filings that would prove to Canadians that the screen is working. That just doesn't exist. There are no checks.
There's no evidence to suggest, we have no evidence demonstrating that there's actually been a decision made with respect to the screen, period. It's just not something that there's a public, reporting mechanism for.
Now, can you understand why Canadians would be skeptical about the effectiveness of the screen in light of all of the issues that you have identified, coupled with the fact that it is being administered by two people who answer to and are beholden to the Prime Minister, including his Chief of Staff?
I am equally skeptical. So, yes, I can understand why the public would be.
Now, you spoke about transparency, the need for the Prime Minister to, at the very least, be transparent about how the ethics screen is working on a day-to-day basis. Am I correct? Mm-hmm.
Yes.
And we've seen really no transparency. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And the Prime Minister just on the weekend met with investment leaders and business leaders in London and in New York. When he was asked, who did he meet with? What companies did they represent? He didn't provide an answer. So we don't know if these companies are connected to Brookfield or any of the other companies that are subject to the screen. We don't know anything about what those discussions are. Should Canadians be concerned about the Prime Minister not coming forward and disclosing that information? Shouldn't he?
There's no obligation to. The question is whether there should be a moral standard to do so. There's no legal standard to do so. It does raise the question of whether or not we could go back and meet with the commissioner and talk about whether this screen is robust enough and has enough detail in it about how it should be implemented.
In the interest of transparency, you spoke about transparency. I would submit, consistent with that, it would be the proper and correct thing to do for the Prime Minister to disclose that, wouldn't it be? That would be consistent with being transparent.
There's a moral argument to be made. I agree.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Cooper.
Great. My questions will be for Professor Stedman. I figure you've been hearing me ask questions, and so you know what I'm interested in. You mentioned a case, and not everybody realizes or recognizes that this is a particular case. And one might think that the ethics screen is sufficient and that situations would be resolved by simply saying there is no conflict of interest or appearance of a conflict of interest when it's a situation of general application. Do you agree that there is no conflict of interest or appearance of conflict of interest when we're talking about general application for the Prime Minister? I'm not talking about a simple minister here, but for a Prime Minister. Do you agree?
No, the general application rule doesn't eliminate the very fact of a conflict of interest. It is a decision that the lawmakers have made with respect to where they want to draw the line of best fit between eliminating conflicts and not disincentivizing public service. Your only way, as was mentioned earlier, to eliminate conflicts entirely is to just not have assets that could put you in conflict. There's no other way. So a screen, to come back to the screens, screens are interesting, right? We've never seen anything with this breadth before. I think what we need to do is learn from it. I think what we need to do is, in a very open way, say what's working. How do we make a screen like this work? This is a unique circumstance. Is there something we can do in the act to improve it so that screens like this make sense and actually give the public confidence that they're useful? I think that's the question, and that's the conversation we need to have, is how to make screens make sense at this level.
What do we currently know about this screen? We've been talking about this ethics screen that was negotiated with the Prime Minister. What do we know about it other than those who are responsible for its application? Do you believe that it is transparent enough?
I think one of the things that we can learn here is that we should be learning as we go with respect to this screen. There should be an ongoing conversation about how it works and how that proportionality clause is going to be operationalized. Because what I really do believe is that if we understand how this screen works, we can update the act to include standards that are higher for screens. With respect to public reporting, maybe, which is, I think, the thing that everyone's getting at here is there's no public reporting that's part of this screen. Maybe we want some of that. But I think maybe we also want to put into words the proportionality bit, because that is the counterbalance to the general application rule, right?
Étant donné que ce sont des gens qui
Given that these are subordinates to the Prime Minister and they have to manage the application of this screen, do you not believe that there should be a review done by an external reviewer or supervisor that would come from the Commissioner's office? And we wouldn't have to require the use of the Ethics Commissioner, but to have ongoing reviews instead of only when a case occurs. Would that not ensure more transparency? Because currently the people applying the screen are subordinates. And so we don't even know if they are in a situation of a conflict of interest.
I think that point is very well taken. I think you would get some resistance to the idea of someone external to the Prime Minister's dealings being able to provide oversight, because there are going to be interactions that are confidential, and that must necessarily stay so. And so there is a level of trust we have to put in the people who are responsible for the screen. But I do think you're absolutely right to point out that being subordinate to the Prime Minister means that you are in a conflict of interest. You care about his interests in as much as you care about the public interest, because you sit at his pleasure. There's no way to avoid that. You could have part or at least some sense of reporting back into the Commissioner's office on an ongoing basis. And that may have to go through the Commissioner themselves as opposed to through someone delegated by the Commissioner.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Stedman. Merci, M. Thériault.
Professor Turnbull, does ethics require more than law?
Yes, because I think the threshold around the public's expectation about what it means to be ethical is not going to be met by compliance with a law. The public expects more than that. And that's why we have ethics rules in the first place. We didn't always have an ethics regime. We didn't always have a code of conduct for members of parliament. That's just been in the last 20 years or so. I think that it's because sometimes even when people act in accordance with the law, there's a sense that, but yeah, it's still not right? Like it's still not enough for the public to feel like I trust you with my money, I trust you with the policy decisions that are going to affect me and my family. And so it's very important, I think, that ethics and law are not the same thing.
on dit c'est pas parce que c'est
We can say that it's not because something is legal that it's moral. We now need to review the legislation. Professor Stedman talked about the fact that we are dealing with a very particular case that we haven't seen before, and that is the situation of the current Prime Minister. I think that we can agree objectively. I'm not playing politics when I say this. Ethically speaking, and this comes back to what Mr. Stedman said, it's not only about doing good, it's about the perception of doing good. And so what would we need to do in order to reach that goal? What would you propose? What can we do? Because you stated that it might not be with the legislation. And so what would you propose? And if you can also answer this following question, what we have now, is it sufficient given the case that we mentioned about the Prime Minister?
So there has been a lot of attention, I think, paid to the Prime Minister's pre-political life. He comes to this role, it seems very quickly, right, where all of a sudden the former Prime Minister steps down, there's a leadership race, all of a sudden Prime Minister Carney is the Prime Minister, it happens very quickly. And the public didn't get, I think, a whole lot of time to get to know him necessarily, but what they are left with, what they know about, is his role in the private sector and the kinds of things that he did, the kinds of offices he held, and a little bit of information about what his financial holdings look like, and now he's had to put that in, kind of put that in public in a certain way. I don't necessarily know. I don't know that the ethics regime is not able to handle that. His case is unusual, yes. And the kinds of holdings he has, the kinds of positions he's held, of course those things are unusual. I suspect that's probably what contributed to his political success in the first place. But he's an unusual case where he's got a much longer list of things he has to recuse himself from, put up a screen about, put in a blind trust. He's in a bit of an unusual case. But the point of the ethics regime is to be able to enable his participation, as is anybody else who has been successful in the private sector.
Mais est-ce que c'est suffisant? Parce que
But is it enough? Because some experts have told us, for general application, there is no issue with the perception of conflict of interest or real conflict of interest. Is it enough? What should we do?
We think it's not enough. I mean, if the public has an issue with it, they'll let people know. I don't get the sense personally that there's a widespread sense that the Prime Minister is in public office for the wrong reason. If he really cared about money all that much, I suspect he would have stayed in the private sector. I suspect he's leaving money on the table by being in the role he's in.
Bon, c'est pas une question.
I haven't named him. I'm trying to talk about this as an objective case. But being a prime minister should require more than an average minister or member of parliament. It's easy for us to see a situation of a conflict of interest for an MP. They're not making decisions on behalf of the country, meeting with lobbyists throughout the world. And so should there not be even more transparency because this case is so particular? There's a difference between an MP, a minister, and a prime minister. Even in a situation where there's recusal, is it enough? What could we do? What more could we do? I know we could always talk about intentions and play politics with ethics, but I want us to do the opposite. And I need to know what we need to do. You seem to be saying that we won't be able to succeed, but I don't think the current legislation is enough. The proof is in the situation that we're seeing now, and it's beyond us.
Monsieur Thériault, les 6 minutes sont...
Monsieur Thériault, your 6 minutes are up. Perhaps we can come back to this at your next turn. I did ask a question.
Very brief response, Ms. Turnbull. I would appreciate that. Very brief.
Create ethics rules around individuals, ever. That's not the point.
Okay. Thank you. That completes our first round. Je m'excuse, Monsieur Thériault, mais c'est 6 minutes.
Apologies, Mr. Thériault. You did have a little bit more time.
Monsieur Hardy pour 5 minutes.
Mr. Hardy, you have 5 minutes for the second round. Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Professor Stedman and Dr. Turnbull. I'd like to come back to what my colleague was saying. In an answer, you mentioned that, and we're talking about the current case, that the Prime Minister should have just invested in the private sector. It would have been more beneficial for him than to come into the public sector. So that's in the case of somebody wanting to bring their knowledge and benefit their country. But could there be a potential case where the person knows that a lot of people will be losing money and our legislation is not able to deal with a situation like that? Is that something that could cause us some trouble if that were the case?
Si, exemple, dans le cas...
For example, if it's somebody who manages portfolios and knowing that a government is going to fall, they say, well, we need someone to protect our interests. could that be a case that would be problematic because our legislation would not be able to counter such a case?
I want to make sure I understand your question. Do you mean somebody who the Prime Minister would be thinking of in terms of their private interests?
On pourrait voir les intérêts privés. Parce que dans le cas que vous présentez,
In the case that you mentioned, you're talking about someone who wants to be Prime Minister, that they will be doing it with good intentions to make the country better. But could there not be a case where a person would be coming into politics not necessarily to make the country better, but to ensure that the people that they have business with don't lose money, and then they would be well positioned to do so, and that would put our country in peril a little bit?
So I think what we have to guard against that is disclosure. We do have, even though we don't necessarily require people to enumerate the exact dollar amounts of the stocks they hold, we don't necessarily get the nitty-gritty on everything. We do have a broad picture of what kinds of affiliations the person's had, where they've worked before, and that way the public has a way to say, look, it looks like this person is acting in the interests of a certain group, and we don't want that, and so that would create a political backlash.
on est un peu dans cette situation-là où est-ce qu'on sait, exemple, que
Well, we know that the Prime Minister is meeting with people, but isn't telling us who he's meeting with, knowing that it could be a conflict of interest. Now, the Prime Minister does not have to share his holdings, and I agree with you, you mentioned the public opinion. Our democracy is struggling because people do not trust our institutions. And so we need to do everything that we can to rebuild that trust. And I think that we should have access to this information. In the current case that we're looking at, last week or 2 weeks ago, the Prime Minister was meeting with people, and it was a potential conflict of interest, but he didn't have to share it.
Point. And it's not, in that case, it's not so much about what's in the Prime Minister's blind trust or ethics screen. It's about who he's talking to and what conversations he might be having and whether he has more pull with those people and that sort of thing. And so I think it'd be interesting to be clear about what sort of offense we think that person might be engaging in that context, right? Like if he's talking to people who, so what? Like what offense do you think he's, like, what possible bad thing could be happening?
on est d'accord ici qu'on doit clarifier ça.
We need to be able to clarify so that Canadians understand when it becomes a conflict, and we need safeguards that are clear in order to rebuild trust. Do you agree with that?
If in the event, for example, that the Prime Minister was having conversations with people with corporate entities that he had relationships with, and from an ethics perspective, the public has an interest in making sure that a public office holder doesn't do anything that benefits himself or benefits his friends or that sort of thing. And so the public would have an interest in knowing, is there any conversation that the Prime Minister is having that would somehow confer some unfair benefit on people he knows or he's worked with before? So it's important then for him to be transparent about who he's meeting with.
On est d'accord sur le fait qu'il devrait être transparent, il devrait dire ses avoirs.
I agree that he should be transparent and share his holdings and state who he's meeting with. We agree there. Now, brief question. I think that it was Dr. Stedman who mentioned, or Professor Stedman, who talked about candidates. Should there be an ethical screen when you apply to be a candidate instead of waiting until later? So if you want to apply, here are the standards. Here's the ethical code that you need to respect before you put your face on a...
Please. Thank you.